When you think about history, are there lots of old guys wearing wigs and stockings? When you think about history, is Napoleon really short? And folks have wooden teeth. Do you know that history can be the most incredible, amazing stories for you and me? Sit back and listen to a story right now. It's honest, it's fun, and it's sure to.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. Are you as excited about this episode as I am? I sure hope so. We're about to dive into another story-filled adventure and learn something new. And remember, by learning more about the past, you can make a positive impact on the future. So pack your bags and let's go.
In the distance, you could hear the rumble of a motorcycle. Moments later, a woman flew past on her Harley-Davidson. "There goes Bessie Stringfield," onlookers would say. "She's the motorcycle queen of Miami." From performing daring stunts to delivering top-secret messages, Bessie could do almost anything on a motorcycle. She was a legend in her own time. While tales of her early life were often shrouded in mystery, one thing is certain: she was a fearless adventurer. Bessie traveled across the country's dangerous roads on her motorcycle and made history doing it. She would be the very first black woman to ride solo across the United States. This is the story of Bessie Stringfield, the woman who would become the motorcycle queen. The year was 1928. The stars shimmered in the night sky above the city of Boston. A 16-year-old girl named Bessie climbed into the bed and pulled the covers up over her shoulders. Her mind was buzzing with excitement. All she could think about was her new bike. For weeks, she had been asking her mother for a motorcycle. Finally, after quite a lot of begging, her mother got her one. Bessie rolled over onto her back and stared at the ceiling. Would she be able to fall asleep? She could not wait to take her motorcycle around the neighborhood. There was, however, one slight problem. She had no idea how to ride it. But this didn't worry Bessie. She was sure she could figure it out. Finally, her eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted off into a deep sleep. That night, Bessie had a dream. In her dream, she was sitting on her motorcycle. She turned on the ignition, and with a firm kick to a lever, the motorcycle roared to life. She began shifting the gears, and soon she was riding around the block. When Bessie woke up, she flung the covers off and jumped out of bed. She looked at the motorbike her mother had just bought her. It was a 1928 Indian Scout. Its red paint gleamed in the sunlight. Just as Bessie envisioned in her dream, she started turning gears and knobs to get the engine ready. She placed her foot on the lever and pushed it down with a powerful kick. The motorcycle began to rumble and shake. She hopped on the bike and shifted the gears to move forward. It wasn't long before she was circling the block. According to Bessie, this is how she learned how to ride a motorcycle. You see, no one had ever taught her. She simply saw it in a dream. 3 years later, Bessie had grown more confident in her motorcycle skills. She decided to take them on the road. At 19 years old, she would travel around the country on her bike. At that time, in the 1930s, a woman on a motorcycle was a rare sight. She knew she would get odd looks from people as she traveled across the country, but she was determined. Now, she just needed to figure out where to go. The United States was a huge country, and there were a lot of towns to choose from. How was she going to decide? Bessie pulled out a map and set it down in front of her. She took a coin from her pocket and flipped it into the air. The coin hit the map and began to spin. Wherever it landed, it was where she would go. Finally, the coin fell flat on one side. Bessie lifted it up and looked at the spot underneath it. "I guess that's where I'm headed," she announced as she pointed to the spot on the map. Bessie took off, traveling across dusty roads. Many of these roads weren't paved like the ones today. Her teeth rattled as she drove over the gravel paths. Loose stones kicked up all around her, hitting her bike. These stones could do a lot of damage, which was another problem. If her bike broke down, she was on her own. There were no cell phones at this time, and Bessie couldn't just call someone for help. So she became her own mechanic. If her engine started to make a funny noise or she got a flat tire, she'd have to fix it herself. Bessie would soon face more challenges as she traveled further from home. When she headed south, she met many people who discriminated against her because of the color of her skin. At this time, the South had a system of laws that forced people to separate because of their skin color. These were called Jim Crow laws. Black and white people weren't allowed to use the same restaurants, schools, bathrooms, or hotels. As Bessie traveled from town to town, she would knock on doors to try and find a place to stay for the night. However, because she was black, she often got turned away. Sometimes she met a black family who would take her in for the night, but if she didn't, she just had to sleep on her bike. "I suppose I'll be sleeping here tonight," she said, looking at an empty gas station. Bessie rolled up her jacket and placed it on the bike's handlebars to make a pillow. She laid her head on the jacket and stretched her feet out to rest on the bike's fender. It was far from comfortable, but it was the best she could do. She closed her eyes to get some much-needed sleep. When Bessie woke up, she pulled on her jacket and kick-started the engine. She hopped on her bike and zoomed back onto the road. While Bessie traveled, she had to be on high alert. Traveling alone at that time was dangerous, especially as a black woman. There had been many times when she had been threatened. One time, a white man in a pickup truck had even tried to run her off the road. Bessie fell from her bike and watched it hit the ground in front of her. She got up and brushed the dirt right off her legs. She had quite a few scratches and scrapes from the fall. She walked over to her bike and sighed. It looked pretty banged up and was in desperate need of fixing. Bessie was fearless and determined in the face of prejudice. In the South, some local people were curious about Bessie and her motorcycle. They would ask her questions to learn more. After hearing her story, some of the white gas station owners would fill her tank for free. Wherever she went, people were surprised to see a woman of color riding a motorcycle. And although she traveled alone, she never felt lonely. She was always happy on two wheels. Bessie became the first black woman to ride a motorcycle across the entire United States by herself. And she wouldn't do it once, she would do it 8 times. During her journeys, she always had to find a way to pay for gas and food. She decided to earn some money by showing off her riding skills at fairs and carnivals. Bessie wowed audiences as she raced her motorcycle on the track. People gasped when she stood up on her bike. One of her feet was on the seat while the other was on the handlebars. Sometimes she would even jump from one side of her bike to the other while it was still moving. And then there was the wall of death. To do this stunt, motorcyclists rode up the walls of a huge wooden barrel called a drome. The audience sat at the top of the drome and looked down to watch the daring stunt. Bessie revved her engine and began driving round and round the wooden walls at top speed. The audience clapped in amazement as they watched her conquer the wall of death. But while Bessie was performing these stunts, a war was brewing across the Atlantic Ocean. And in 1941, this war moved close to home. Bessie turned on the radio to hear the shocking news. "We have witnessed this morning the distant view of a brief battle of Pearl Harbor and the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done." The Japanese had attacked a U.S. Navy base in Hawaii. A war had been waging across Europe for the past 2 years, and now, with the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States may be entering that battle. The very next day, the U.S. President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, stood in front of Congress.
"I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire."
Congress approved the president's request and declared war on Japan. The United States had now entered World War II.
Hi, friends. Are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code ANYTIMENOW for 10% off. Again, that special code is ANYTIMENOW. Okay, let's get back to the story.
Like many others, Bessie saw the newspaper headlines. Life as she knew it had changed. It wasn't long before men and women were asked to do their part to help the war effort. Men were called up to fight while women were encouraged to serve on the home front. Many women helped raise money for the war or worked in factories to build weapons and airplanes. Some made the courageous decision to follow in the soldiers' footsteps. Women served as nurses near the battlefront and trained as pilots. Bessie knew her unique skills would be useful, so she signed up to help the U.S. Army. After she proved that she could handle the rough roads, the Army assigned her a job. She would be a civilian courier. Bessie crossed the gravel streets once again, this time carrying top-secret documents to Army bases throughout the U.S. During the war, Army units were segregated, and Bessie was the only woman in her all-black unit. She continued to carry mail for the Army for several years until 1945. That year, the president went on the radio to tell the American people the good news.
The Japanese have just officially laid down their arms. They have signed terms of unconditional surrender.
World War II had ended. After the war, Bessie moved to Miami, Florida, and trained to become a nurse. Her new neighbors marveled as they watched her ride to work on her Harley-Davidson bike. Even in the 1950s, it was a rare sight to see a woman on a motorcycle. In Florida, Bessie would make quite a name for herself. She started a club called the Iron Horse Motorcycle Club. She was the only female member of the club, as well as its founder. The club organized motorcycle parades around the city, with Bessie leading the way. These parades were hard to miss. You'd hear the rumble of bikes from miles away. Bessie continued to show off her riding skills at competitions. One of these competitions was called a flat track race. Motorcyclists raced their heavy bikes around a dirt track to see who was the fastest. Now, there was just one problem. The competition was only for male riders. This didn't bother Bessie at all. Disguised as a man, she put on her helmet and rode her bike up to the starting line. The other riders lined up beside her, their engines rumbling as they waited for the signal. Finally, a man waved a big flag in the air and the bikes took off. Bessie jolted forward and passed many of the other riders. As she came to the first curve in the dirt path, she leaned hard on her bike. Her foot brushed the ground below. The riders looped around the track again and again. Finally, it was the last lap. Bessie accelerated forward with dirt kicking up all around her. As she crossed the finish line, the crowd cheered. Bessie had come in first place. But then, she took off her helmet and everyone gasped. They had expected to see a man. The rider was a woman? They asked in surprise. Although Bessie had won the race, she was denied the prize money. The competition did not accept female riders. But Bessie did not let this bother her too much. She continued to show off her skills in daring stunts. It wasn't long before she got the nickname the Motorcycle Queen of Miami. In the 1960s, Bessie saw many changes happen across the country. Black Americans were protesting for equal rights and called for an end to discrimination. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. This act helped end segregation and the Jim Crow laws. Sitting in her home in Florida, Bessie remembered the nights that she had spent sleeping on her motorcycle. All those years ago, she had been turned away from motels because of the color of her skin. With the Civil Rights Act, she prayed things would be different. Bessie spent the rest of her life in Florida and rode her bike until the very end. You see, she could not imagine life without her motorcycle. She was always happy on two wheels. Years after Bessie passed away, she was inducted into the Motorcycle Hall of Fame. Many would say this was long overdue. Today, Bessie's legacy continues to inspire female motorcyclists. To them and others, she was a fearless adventurer who dared to be different. If you search the history books, you'd struggle to find anyone else quite like Bessie Stringfield, the motorcycle queen.
Welcome back! What did you think of today's adventure? We hope you learned something new. Be sure to share the story with your friends and family, and use what you've learned today to go out there and make a positive impact on history yourself. That's all for now, but if you want to learn more about important and amazing stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to Honest History Magazine, where you'll discover stories from around the world. Thanks for listening! This episode was narrated by Randall Lawrence and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow along for updates on social media.